As I was listening to the discussion, I don't like to brainstorm in the absence of some structure. So if you'll just excuse me for a minute while I draw a couple of things, and I'll try to talk. I'll try to talk while I'm drawing or writing. But as you have noticed, I'm a man, so that makes talking difficult. I'm an engineer, which makes talking really difficult. And I graduated from Texas A&M, so I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that. Since we are here in Austin. But I'm going to draw a couple things up here to try to structure this a little bit because I got a little confused with the breadth of the discussion. It seems to me like what we're trying to get to is some concept of education, particularly for topics related to energy. Yeah? That's a reasonable conclusion from the discussion, yeah? I heard several things being talked about, and they kind of categorize themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the categories, and then we can talk about the categories. One of the items that seemed really, well, maybe I can get it all over here. One of the items that seemed really important was motivation. And you'll notice that there's a little theme in the things that I'm drawing. They all have shun at the end of them. Motivation, compensation. Compensation meaning cost or some benefit. Collaboration. And optimization. Now, as these discussions have been happening today, what I've noticed is that everything centers around these four areas as they relate to education, or at least that's my perspective on it. And just not to lose the shun topic, what we're actually talking about is the integration of these things to create education, yeah? And there's one other one that I'm going to talk about in a minute that's particular to the higher education community, which actually came up in one of the discussions earlier. So this is what I've heard today. And so the first question I have for you is this reasonably accurate? Did you hear the same thing? And the second question I have is, what's missing? Or what needs to be filled in? How do we fill in the gaps? So now I'm going to stop talking. And as most college professors do, I'm going to stand here real quietly until I hear some noise out of somebody, and then we're going to write it down. Yes, sir.
I have a shun to add.
All right.
Satisfaction, as in satisfaction with your education, job satisfaction, life satisfaction.
Oh, well, that's kind of post-education.
Well, but the education is the common, right?
Can we put it under motivation? Or do you want to add another one? You're exactly right. If you're not satisfied with your job, then you're going to bounce out, which is what happens quite often with females in engineering areas, which is why we heard about the program at UT. There's also a big program at Texas State University called Spark that's a National Science Foundation funded program to attract females from high school in cohorts into STEM fields and particularly engineering fields, to retain them and to help them attach to mentors who come from the industry so that once they get out of their college experience, they don't bounce out in their first couple of years of education, in their first couple of years of post-education life. Satisfaction is a big one, particularly for females in engineering, because engineering is boring. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry.
So I submit that they are both serial and parallel variables. Satisfaction and motivation, they move in a serial, parallel, circular fashion. You're looking for satisfaction, and you get yourself motivated by that future vision of satisfaction, and then when you find it, it continues to motivate you because it's fun, because engineering is not boring. It's very interesting and exciting if you know how to do it right.
Ouch. I felt that. Satisfaction.
I was wondering where family comes in, because we had a lot of conversation about family involvement.
Family.
Yeah, because collaboration to me is collaboration between entities, organizations, things like that.
Yeah, the thing that I heard on this was interdisciplinary collaboration as well as industry. That's what I wrote down. Family is an interesting. Let me throw you a counterpoint. I've been an engineer my whole life. I have 4 kids, 0 engineers. I think there's tagging onto the serial and parallel thing. There's a personal piece that's going on there too. I mean, sometimes there's square pegs and round holes, and they don't fit right. But I agree, family is a big deal, particularly for underrepresented or underprivileged. It's a huge deal for those kids because they don't even know that this stuff exists.
Right. So
And they don't know how to deal with it once they find out that it does exist. I'll let you pick.
Inspiration.
Inspiration.
To be inspired for ADR generation, the space program, or things like that. Fascination.
Inspiration. Does that come under motivation?
It does, but motivation, I was thinking more could be tied to what you might see at the end. Inspiration is the spark that ignites it.
Inspiration. Next. Right here.
Oh, thank you. So everybody's buying into the shun meme that you've put out here, and I like
I'm
it.
just throwing it out there.
I like it too. So I'm going to throw up disruption, and then where does this structure fit in? I would posit that this is actually you've already zeroed in on something, and we need to back up one more step and look at the environment that those 5 components live in. Because one of the challenges the energy industry has is that there's rapid change available and desired by society, but our structures aren't delivering it.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And so we really want to change much more quickly, and we want to do things on a much bigger scale than the structures that we live in are permitting us to do.
And the stodgy educational establishment is not moving fast enough to keep pace with.
And the sources of revenue, the sources of money that drive investment are not being moved to make that delivery. So we have a big disconnect in what society we need to do, and a lot of the youth want to do, but the money and structure is not enabling them to do.
I agree with that. Let's put that down here as priority. Or priorities. Part of it down there as priorities. Yeah?
Recognition
Recognition.
as the beginning and end of a process, because you can recognize a need to begin the process, and then you have an augmented realization at the end of that process.
Okay. You mean from a personal standpoint, as a person who enters the engineering field, you have to recognize that you want to go that way, then you have to go that way, and then after having gone that way, you have to look back and go, that was pretty good.
I guess so, yeah. But I mean, even along the lines of trying to like achieve something in the first place, like you need to I mean, in the same lines, but what we hope to achieve in education, we need to recognize and pinpoint what exactly it is we're trying to solve, as with any problem-solving application, and then recognize that by the end, if we actually solved it, because I mean, systems engineers, for example, the worst mistake that you can make is coming up with a solution to the wrong problem.
At this point, I have to echo the comment that was made earlier that you're a perceptive young man. You have just summed up, in some sense, the concept of engineering, which I'm going to sum up for you in 3 steps. Tom, pay attention. 1, paint the target. Recognize the problem. Solve the problem that you're intending to solve. 2, hit the target. Do something to try to hit the target. 3, measure how far you missed. Actually, it's 4 steps. Try again.
I'm going to add a different dimension, and that is, how about creating a target? Isn't that what Steve Jobs did?
Yeah, that's when I say paint the target, I say that in the sense of identify. You're saying if you don't identify the target, you need to create the target. Okay. Paint or create the target if it doesn't exist, as in iPhones. Yeah.
So I may have missed this part, but when he said recognition, I thought he meant something different than what he actually explained it to be. But
Okay.
when I think recognition, I think reach, and I think like this is all swirling around the fact that someone has identified an interest in engineering. But I'm wondering, what about, you know, you talk at the top of that, you have education and then in parentheses energy. What about all of the low income women, minorities, or even regular students who don't have any exposure to engineering or STEM at all, unless they're lucky enough to get a good teacher in high school and happens to have a workshop that one of the earlier panels is offering. So I'm just wondering, how does this extend out into reach? Because we can all talk about how great to make it for the students already in the system, but what about the ones missing? And by all accounts, we're here because we want to find and reach those missing students and build a bigger pipeline, because our pipeline is too tiny.
Reach, recruitment. Is that what you mean by reach?
Yes.
Okay. What else are we missing? What other conversations are not being had?
You're talking about losing females in schools. You're going to keep a lot of them if you can be accommodating to their life disruptions. So if you're halfway through a class, say physics, and your kids, I have 4 kids, get strep throat, and you get strep throat, that doesn't all happen at once in 1 week and everybody's over it. It's, you know, a lot of times it's a staggered thing, or, you know, there's ways of dealing with it, but there's a lot of times it causes problems that could be dealt with if you actually have accommodations so that you can continue on that coursework, pick up where you left off, rather than
this may go back to the flipped classroom concept or the less organized classroom concept. Yeah.
Right, where I've had a really hard time finding education opportunities where it's kind of at my own pace, you know, where I can do a course at my own pace, and that would accommodate me, and I think it would accommodate a lot of females, especially, or males who are, you know, in the caregiving positions. So I think accommodation's majorly missing. And, you know, sometimes I want to blame the revenue generating side of the education because I think it makes a lot of sense for them to have to, hey, all these kids, they've got to re-enroll and re-enroll and re-enroll. But it loses a lot of students who really can succeed in those classes and have the mental capacity to succeed in those classes. Right.
I heard this term exactly once today.
Yeah. So I worry where that interest affects lack of accommodation.
You care to bring it up again? You were the one and only person who mentioned return on investment, and I made a note of it because I thought it was fascinating.
Well, on our end, on our end, since we have investors, and our investors, you know, our target is 21 million, and we spend about 2 million annually on education programming across our 15 district service area. And so we have to justify, well, what is the outcome, right? So in long-term talent development, the return is you're getting more students the education and the skills they need so that you can connect them with good jobs. And part of that is strong work with school district on a number of fronts, but then you get stuck into, okay, now you've gotten them into college, this is the next phase, right, is completion. So for us, our return on investment is the actual student matriculation and then eventual completion, and that they're able to compete for the good jobs that we have, 44,000 open jobs here in Central Texas, at least for this last quarter.
44,000 open jobs in engineering?
No, about 30% are STEM focused. So that's 18% in computer mathematical applications, which also includes engineering, and another 10% in health sector.
Okay. Okay. What else are we missing? What have we not talked about that needs to be talked about? Or what have we talked about maybe not in the exact right way? Or what other? I guarantee I've got another thing I'm going to put up here. If you're ready for it, I'll do it.
This is very much of a personal, individual flow chart, I think, as opposed to...
I was just writing down what I heard people talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm thinking about the benefit to society. I mean, society needs well-educated people so that they have, you know, good middle-class jobs, pay their taxes, and don't go in the streets and riot.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
So you pointed to priorities.
Societal priorities.
Okay.
It could be personal or societal
So,
priorities. There's,
yeah.
we also heard somebody talking about, which I thought was also fascinating, and I also wrote down, I think it was Leah, that was talking about couldn't find places to do STEM-related activities because they were taken up by sports. So societal priorities, you know, what the NFL is a $7 billion nonprofit, whereas STEM organizations don't even approach that amount. So that reflects societal priorities. How can we change those? How can those be changed?
If I could hammer on that with the idea of space, because exactly every school has a basketball court. Every high school has a basketball court in the state of Texas, or almost all of them do. And the societal structure for that. And to me, one of the best steps in the right direction was the formation by Dean Kamen of a robotics as a sport activity. We're now having a generation of students who have the structure within the guise of a team, a coach, a mentor, a game that has been defined year over year, that is a sport that gets kids involved, whether it's the best thing, whether there are things that can be changed about it, absolutely, but that structure then to put in place so that that societal change can happen, because there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands kids across the nation, tens of thousands in Central Texas participating. But, for instance, and why STEM Park opened, is there are 4 world-class teams here in Austin alone that never played a game until they went out of town to compete. There's not a, to use the basketball analogy, there wasn't a basketball court. We had to practice layups, we had to practice dribbling, we practiced the skills, but until they left town, there was not, the closest arena heretofore was in NASA in Houston before the STEM Park built one. And teams from all over, we have them come drive from San Antonio, we have them drive from Kaleen to come down and use the arena because of space.
Does that get to your priorities issue that you were talking about? Is that kind of along the same lines? A specific example, maybe?
Wonderful adjunct, but not so much. That's much more tactical and strategic than I was thinking. I'm thinking more in terms of what is society going to need 5, 10, 40 years from now, and how does education today provide for that, so that we have an educated populace that serves the best needs of all the society. Whereas I think Becky's statement is very important and very tactical, and I love the idea of Kamen's making a sport out of robotics. Love that guy. But I'm thinking a little bit more strategically.
So what does society need sometime in the future, and how do we address that now so that we don't miss it in the future? So that we have the workforce that we need in the future, so that we...
And some of that circles back to my liberal arts comment about, I learned Fortran programming. Well, that's pretty much useless.
I'm right there with you.
And so anything that you learn as a
Anything that you learn as a very ephemeral technology, it's going to go away pretty shortly. But if you learn to think, if you learn to speak, to read, to write, to conduct yourself in society, the liberal arts component, the yin-yang part of it, then I think you're a much more rounded person who can address the unknown employment issues and societal issues that are going to come up.
You're talking about education versus training.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You're all about that education. No training. Sorry.
There's a place for those.
I tend to agree with that. The training tends to be temporal in many cases, whereas education is permanent. Yeah.
You know, one thing I just think about when, in relation to the comment there, is, you know, you're really talking about economic externalities, right? And how do you communicate the long-term value of education because it's going to have a positive social impact. You're going to have less people relying on social services. You're going to have more taxpayers. You're going to have less people in the prison system. You're going to have more people that are gainfully employed and people that are, you know, contributing meaningfully to society. So you can measure all of those things, right? And they have a dollar value and they have a big impact. But I think how you get there is culture, and you know, the fact that we choose to use the space that we have in our facilities for, you know, prioritizing sports. That's something that there's nothing wrong with you know, basketball or football or anything like that, but we do have to, I think, create a culture that's more centered around academics. You know, we're competing on a global scale, and if we don't,
and not in football,
right? And if we don't do that, then we're probably going to lose out. And one example, it sticks out in my head of a local school where you have 90% of the students that are economically disadvantaged. And I'm thinking of Del Valley High School, out towards the airport. You walk into that school, and what you see is right down the main corridor, pictures of all of their seniors who graduated and where they went to college. So the class of 2014 is looking at the class of 2013, class of 2014 is looking at the class of well, you get the idea. You're seeing where they matriculated. It's mainly to four-year schools. And I think that sends a powerful message to students that are coming onto the campus. LASA does a great job as well. I mean, LASA has one of the highest direct-to-college enrollment rates in the region, close to Eanes, which is 87% of its high school students that are graduating. But again, it's a culture that's created by campus leadership, district leadership, and I think that folks that are working with schools and school districts can create that expectation that we want this campus, we want this district to have a college-going culture and cause that shift so that there are more Del Valley High Schools serving underrepresented, low-income students that are motivating them to pursue education beyond high school.
Absolutely. Got one right here.
My comments were in relation to culture and the fact that there's such an extreme disconnect between the people who utilize energy and the people who create it. If you talk to anybody about the vitalness of something like agriculture, they can easily tell you why it's important. If you speak to anybody in general about energy, all they know about it is that they don't like it when it's gone. We live in a culture where we have an abundance of energy and we have access to it almost all of the time. Because of that, there's kind of a disassociation in its vitalness. The way to reach people is to begin with industry really engaging in consumers and consumers then being able to pass that information on to their children. I write about energy nonstop. I talk about energy nonstop. My 15-year-old did not care about energy until he was giving an extra credit project at school, which required him to connect some things within our home. Then suddenly he made the personal connection that this involved his everyday, that how much energy he was consuming and what he was doing would affect him in his lifetime. And now he's on a course for electrical engineering. That's something that even having exposure within the home, he didn't have before because there was no personal connection. When the lights went out, he would complain, but understanding the industry that was behind it and all that went into it was something that didn't make sense to him. If you asked him whether or not he was an advocate of renewable energy, he absolutely was. But if you asked him what was behind that, he couldn't explain it to you. Never mind that there were careers or opportunities there.
Yeah, that gets to some of the issues. That gets to some of the issues that people with smaller children face, and we face in the university environment with sequencing of information. Sometimes people aren't ready to accept the information that they consume, right? So sometimes stuff has to be fed out to them in the right order. especially with smaller kids or younger kids, sometimes they can't really get their head around some of the complexities of this energy market, which is it's an incredible beast. There's a lot of stuff going on in the creation of energy. The consumption is way too easy.
In response to what you were talking about, I mean, I find sometimes you're exposed to things and you don't get any value out of that in that moment. But years later, you can still reflect on that. So just because it doesn't have an impact like here and now, doesn't mean it doesn't have like a lifetime, chance to still grow into an impact. So, even if it's out of order in one way or another, I still find myself learning from even childhood experiences I reflect back on, or education that I received, 4 or 5 years ago. So just to think about education as not something that has an immediate effect. Sometimes it can take years to actually come out with its effect.
Well, from what I'm hearing, I feel that a lot of it can be boiled down to approach. I mean, just to return to whether or not we're teaching to AP scores or like testing in general versus application, having those real world examples. I mean, the one drawback that I've had over the course of my experience at Lost is that in the core subjects, we hardly ever did labs, which was, we're missing out on that application aspect unless we take an elective course like biotech, which we're constantly doing labs. And I mean, it's this balance again that I preach to, and it's just recognizing that like the direction that we need to be moving forward is what's the most important thing, and is why we figured that just locally in the robotics park we have the 4 cores, and just robotics in general is so interdisciplinary that we have the technical application, but we also have the physics and the mathematics, mathematical analysis built into the curriculum that we're trying to get across. And that spans across the mechanics, the programming, the digitronics, and the communication. Where
that's one of the reasons robotics is one of the primary uptakes at lower levels, because it's very interdisciplinary, it's very hands-on, it's very combination of theory and practice. It exercises all of those different muscles simultaneously. I agree, the gulf between theory and practice needs to be closed in a clever fashion.
Yeah, just going back to the bridging the gap between industry and education, and what you're talking about with ROI is industry needs to realize that they still need to invest in kids as young as kindergarten. And the ROI is going to be, 15 or 20 years until they're graduated from college and in the jobs that we're trying to fill. But, how do you convey that to industry? You need to invest in the full spectrum.
Who may be worried about closing the books for the current quarter.
Yeah,
you're talking about a 10-year horizon for somebody that's worried about paychecks and stuff at the end of the fiscal year and whatever. That's exactly right. But the investment may not be completely monetary here, is what you're talking about. The investment may be in kind in terms of effort and collaboration, not necessarily putting a hand out for money.
Although both are very important.
Both are very important. I will agree with that. We got another one over here.
I think if the issue is like getting people into engineering, a lot of what I see, I'm a freshman right now at UT, and when I tell people I'm in mechanical engineering, they're like, wow, that's so hard, I could never do it because physics and math. So I think a lot of people are they're like scared of math and physics, which probably comes from in high school and middle school. It's just, we were just taught kind of badly. So
well, it's also hard.
Yeah. But I think a lot of it is just fear of physics, which is why some people don't go into engineering. Just a thought.
Did we miss anything? That's the last. Did we miss anything? Is there anything else we need to put up here, Christine? You good with this? Did we go the right direction? Are you
yes,
happy?
I think that was awesome. So
okay.
Excellent.
Are we at the end of the time then?
Yes.
Oh, I got one more thing to say. In the context of all of this, it might be interesting to look back at President Obama's recent STEM initiative, announced on the 23rd of March, $240 million. 150 million of it is corporate philanthropy. 90 million of it is directed towards underrepresented youth. 25 million is scientific, is creation of media for scientific literacy. So it kind of addresses all of the things that we've talked about, but I'm still not sure that's enough.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. McClellan. Please join me in thanking him.